A single gunshot echoed through the mountains as Sarah Finley stood frozen at the weathered wooden altar, her white dress billowing in the autumn wind that swept through the half-empty church. Tightening her trembling fingers around her bare hand, she realized with piercing clarity that Richard wasn't coming, and neither was the ring he had promised her. It was October 12th, 1876, in the bustling mining town of Silver Springs, Colorado. The discovery of silver veins in the nearby mountains had transformed what was once a quiet settlement into a place where fortunes were made and lost daily. Sarah had arrived 2 years prior, following her father's dream of prosperity after they'd lost everything in Chicago. "I think we've waited long enough," Reverend Thomas said softly, sympathy evident in his eyes. The small congregation of townspeople shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging whispers behind gloved hands. Most had only come for the spectacle, the banker's daughter being married to the town's wealthiest mine owner, and now they had an even better story to tell. "He's just delayed," Sarah whispered, though she knew better. Richard Blackwell had been growing increasingly distant over the past month. The rumors about his gambling debts and secret meetings with investors from Denver had reached even her ears, but she had chosen to believe his promises. "Sarah," her father said, appearing at her side and speaking in hushed tones, "we should go. This is unfortunate." Her father, Porter Finley, had once been a successful businessman in Chicago before the Great Fire took everything. Now, as the town's bookkeeper, he barely made enough to keep them in their modest home. Sarah's marriage to Richard had been meant to secure both their futures. Just as Sarah was about to turn away, the church doors burst open. But instead of Richard in his tailored suit, a tall figure stood silhouetted against the bright autumn sunlight. "Pardon the interruption," said a deep voice as the man stepped forward. Dust covered his leather vest and faded blue shirt. A worn Stetson hat cast shadows across sun-weathered features, and spurs jingled softly with each deliberate step down the aisle. Sarah recognized him instantly, Patrick Quincy, the cowboy who managed the neighboring ranch. They had spoken only a handful of times when he came to town for supplies. She'd always found his quiet manner intriguing, so different from Richard's boisterous confidence. "Miss Finley," Patrick said, removing his hat as he approached. His eyes, the color of a summer sky, met hers directly. "I've just come from Blackwell's office. He left on the morning train to Denver." A collective gasp rose from the congregation. "Left," Sarah repeated, the word barely audible. Patrick nodded grimly. "With the contents of the bank vault and whatever else he could carry." He paused, compassion softening his features. "I'm sorry to be the bearer of such news, especially today." The church erupted in chaos as people rushed out, presumably heading toward the bank to confirm their savings were gone. In moments, only Sarah, her father, the Reverend, and Patrick remained. "All those people," Sarah murmured, thinking of the miners who had entrusted their hard-earned money to Richard's bank. "Sheriff's already organizing a posse," Patrick said, "but Blackwell's got a good head start." Sarah stared down at her bare hand. The humiliation burned worse than the betrayal. "He didn't even leave me the ring he promised," she said with a hollow laugh. Patrick stepped closer, his presence solid and reassuring amid her collapsing world. "I noticed something when I was tracking him to the station." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. He dropped this in his haste. In his palm lay a simple gold band, not ornate or extravagant like the diamond Richard had promised, but solid and true. "It's my mother's," Patrick explained. "I've carried it since she passed, thinking someday." He trailed off, then with newfound resolve continued, "You waited at the church with no ring. If you'd accept it, then you'll have mine." Sarah looked up at him, startled by the sincerity in his eyes. This wasn't a proposal, at least not yet, but something about the gesture touched her deeply. I couldn't possibly, not to wear, Patrick clarified quickly. Just to have. So you didn't leave the church empty-handed today. Porter Finley stepped forward protectively. Mr. Quincy, while I appreciate your unusual kindness, my daughter has just suffered quite a shock. Of course, Patrick said, stepping back immediately. I meant no disrespect. Sarah reached out impulsively and touched the band in his palm. Thank you, she said. But I can't accept such a precious keepsake. Patrick nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then perhaps you'll allow me to escort you and your father home. There's likely to be quite a commotion in town once word spreads. As they left the church, Sarah could already hear the shouting from the direction of the bank. Richard had apparently been planning this for weeks, systematically emptying the bank's reserves while maintaining the illusion of business as usual. The walk to the Finley home was brief but tense. Sarah was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. By tomorrow, everyone in Silver Springs would know the full extent of her humiliation. Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Quincy, Porter said as they reached their modest home at the edge of town. Please call me Patrick. He glanced at Sarah, concern evident in his expression. If there's anything you need, we'll manage, Porter assured him firmly. Sarah found her voice at last. Will you join the posse to find Richard? Patrick shook his head. No, madam. My responsibility is to the rocking queue and the cattle. Besides, he added with a slight smile, I suspect Richard Blackwell will find trouble enough without my help. As he turned to leave, Sarah impulsively called out, Mr. Quincy Patrick. He paused, looking back. I appreciate what you tried to do at the church. It was gallant. A hint of color touched his tan cheeks. Nothing gallant about basic decency, Miss Finley. Sarah, she corrected. Sarah, he repeated, the name sounding different in his low voice. I'll be in town on Saturday for supplies. If you feel up to it, perhaps we could talk more then. After he departed, Porter turned to his daughter. That man has had his eye on you for some time, you know. Sarah blinked in surprise. What do you mean? I've seen the way he watches you when he comes to town. Not in an improper way, he hastened to add, but with respect, unlike Blackwell. It doesn't matter now, Sarah said, removing her wedding veil and placing it carefully on the table. After today, no one in this town will want anything to do with me. Porter squeezed her shoulder gently. Don't be too sure. Patrick Quincy isn't the type to be swayed by gossip. And neither are you. As the days passed, news of Richard's deception spread throughout Colorado territory. He had absconded with nearly $30,000, the life savings of dozens of families and the operating funds of 3 local mines. The subsequent closure of the largest mine threw the town's economy into turmoil. By Wednesday, Sarah had endured countless pitying glances and not-so-subtle whispers. She continued her work at the town's small library, cataloging the new shipment of books that had arrived from Denver before Richard's betrayal. Miss Finley. Sarah looked up to find Maggie Jenkins, the blacksmith's wife, standing before her desk. Mrs. Jenkins, how can I help you? I just wanted to say. Maggie hesitated, then continued with resolve. What happened wasn't your fault. My Jacob says you're probably hurting worse than any of us, being left at the altar and all. Sarah managed a small smile. That's kind of you. Not kindness, just truth. That snake fooled us all. Maggie leaned closer. And speaking of men who aren't snakes, I saw Patrick Quincy at Jacob's shop yesterday, getting his mare Rashad. Asked after you, he did. Sarah felt a flutter of something, not quite excitement, but perhaps a momentary lifting of the heaviness that had settled in her chest. Did he? MMHMM. Jacob says he's one of the few ranchers paying fair wages, even to the Mexican workers. A good man. With a meaningful look, Maggie added, Sometimes the Lord closes one door to open another. After Maggie left, Sarah found herself distracted from her cataloging. She had always viewed Patrick as simply another townsperson, polite but distant. Their interactions limited to brief exchanges when he visited the library for agricultural journals or the occasional novel. Yet now she recalled small details, how he always returned books in perfect condition, often with thoughtful observations, how he once waited out a sudden downpour under the library's awning with her, speaking of his dreams to breed stronger cattle suited to Colorado's harsh winters, how he never referred to her as Blackwell's intended, unlike most others, but always addressed her directly as Miss Finley. Saturday arrived with a clarity of sky that belied the town's troubled atmosphere. Sarah almost decided against going to the mercantile, but her father's gentle encouragement and their dwindling supplies compelled her forward. The town square bustled with weekend activity. Sarah kept her head high, ignoring the stares as she made her way to Wilson's mercantile. Inside, she was examining a bolt of fabric when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "That blue would suit you." She turned to find Patrick standing there, hat in hand, his tall frame making the crowded store seem smaller. "Mr. Quincy, I wasn't certain you'd come." "Told you I would," he replied simply. "How are you holding up?" The genuine concern in his voice nearly undid her carefully maintained composure. "As well as can be expected, and yourself?" "Busy. Lost 2 calves to wolves last night." He gestured toward the fabric. "Making something new, just mending," she admitted. "Though perhaps a new start deserves new clothes." His eyes brightened at her words. A wise philosophy. He glanced around, then lowered his voice. "I was wondering if you might join me for coffee at Mrs. Perkins' cafe, if you're not opposed to being seen with me, that is." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Why would I be opposed?" "Well," Patrick said with a slight smile, "I'm just a dusty cowboy and you're a jilted bride and the daughter of a bookkeeper," she finished for him. "I think we're well matched in terms of current social standing." A genuine laugh escaped him, drawing curious glances from other customers. "Fair enough. Shall we?" Mrs. Perkins' cafe occupied a sunny corner of the town square. As they entered, conversations dimmed momentarily before resuming with increased animation. Sarah forced herself to ignore the curious stares. "Pay them no mind," Patrick murmured as he guided her to a corner table. "They'll find something new to talk about soon enough." Once seated with steaming coffee before them, Sarah found herself studying Patrick more carefully. His hands were calloused from work, his skin bronzed by constant exposure to the elements. Yet there was a gentleness in his manner, an intelligence in his eyes that belied the simple cowboy persona. "Tell me about your ranch," she prompted, seeking neutral territory. "The rocking cue." "It's not much compared to some spreads, but it's mine. 400 acres, most of it good grazing land. A small apple orchard my father planted years ago. Cabin needs work, but it's solid." Pride warmed his voice as he spoke. "Got 15 men working for me now, running about 600 head of cattle." "And you manage all this yourself?" Patrick nodded. "My father left it to me 5 years ago, been building it up since." He paused. "And you, I know you work at the library, but what do you love about it?" The question caught her off guard. Richard had never asked about her work, dismissing it as a temporary occupation before marriage. "I love the stories," she answered honestly. "Each book is a different world, a different perspective. And helping people find exactly what they need, a bit of information, an escape, a new skill, there's satisfaction in that." "I can see that," Patrick said. "I still remember the book you recommended last winter, that Twain Fellow's writing about the Mississippi. Read it twice." Sarah felt a flicker of pleasure that he'd remembered. They continued talking, moving from books to cattle breeding to local politics, finding surprising common ground in their views on the territory's future. The afternoon stretched on, their coffee growing cold as the conversation deepened. "I should be getting back," Sarah finally said, noticing the lengthening shadows. "My father will worry." "Of course." Patrick stood, helping her with her chair. "May I walk you home?" Outside, the autumn air had grown crisp. Without comment, Patrick removed his jacket and placed it gently around her shoulders when he noticed her shiver. "I've enjoyed this afternoon," he said as they walked slowly toward her home. "More than I expected." "As have I," Sarah admitted. "I know this is forward, especially given recent events, but—" He paused, seemingly gathering courage. "I'd like to call on you properly, with your father's permission, of course." Sarah stopped walking, turning to face him. "Why, and please be honest, is it because you feel sorry for me?" Patrick's expression grew serious. "I've wanted to call on you since the first time you explained the Dewey Decimal System to me with more passion than most preachers bring to Sunday sermons." A smile tugged at his mouth. "That was 14 months ago. I just never thought I stood a chance against Richard Blackwell's money and position." The simple sincerity in his voice stirred something in Sarah, a feeling of possibility she had thought lost. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Though you should know, people will talk." Patrick shrugged. "Let them. I've never much cared for others' opinions on matters that don't concern them." When they reached the Finley home, Porter was waiting on the porch, pipe in hand, his expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Mr. Finley," Patrick greeted him, removing his hat. "I've had the pleasure of your daughter's company this afternoon, and I'd like your permission to call on her properly." Porter studied him for a long moment. "You understand the situation she's in, Mr. Quincy? The whole town's talking. Some are even suggesting she knew about Blackwell's plans." "Then some are fools," Patrick replied evenly, "and I've never had patience for fools." A slow smile spread across Porter's face. "Come to dinner tomorrow, then, 6 o'clock." As Patrick bid them farewell, Sarah returned his jacket. Their fingers brushed momentarily, and she felt a curious warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the fading sunlight. "Until tomorrow," he said, his eyes holding hers for a heartbeat longer than necessary. After he left, Porter gave his daughter a knowing look. "Interesting development." "It's just dinner, Father," Sarah protested, though she couldn't quite suppress a smile. "Of course," he agreed, not sounding convinced in the slightest. "Just dinner with a man who's carried a torch for you for over a year." "A year? Surely not," Porter chuckled. "My dear, I may be getting older, but my eyesight is just fine. That man has looked at you like you hung the moon since long before Blackwell proposed. He was just too honorable to interfere." That night, as Sarah prepared for bed, she found herself reflecting on the day's events. There was something refreshingly straightforward about Patrick Quincy, no pretense, no games, just honest words and actions. It was too soon for her heart to fully trust again, but for the first time since the disastrous wedding day, she felt a flicker of hope for what might lie ahead. Sunday morning brought news that shifted the town's focus dramatically. The posse had caught up with Richard Blackwell in Denver, but not before he'd lost most of the stolen money in a high-stakes poker game. He was being returned to Silver Springs to face charges, expected to arrive on Monday's train. "This changes things," Porter remarked as they walked home from church, where the news had spread rapidly. "The trial will keep the scandal fresh." Sarah sighed. "I suppose I should be glad he's facing justice, but part of me wishes he'd just disappeared." "Understandable, but perhaps this is better closure of a sort." "Yes, I suppose." Her thoughts turned to the evening ahead. "Do you think we should postpone dinner with Patrick?" Given the circumstances, Porter considered this. "That's for you to decide. though from what I've observed of Mr. Quincy, I doubt the gossip will deter him. Indeed, Patrick arrived precisely at 6, freshly shaven and wearing a clean shirt under his best vest, a small bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers in his hand. "From the meadow near the creek," he explained as he presented them to Sarah. "Last ones of the season, I expect." The dinner was simple roast chicken with vegetables from their small garden, but the conversation flowed easily. Patrick spoke of his plans for the ranch, his hope to introduce new breeding stock from back east. "The railroad makes it possible now," he explained. "Could revolutionize cattle ranching in these parts if done right." "You've given this considerable thought," Porter observed. Patrick nodded. "A man should have vision for his future. Speaking of which," he turned to Sarah, "I understand Blackwell's being brought back tomorrow." "Yes," she confirmed, appreciating his directness. "I'm not certain what to expect. If you'd prefer not to face the spectacle alone, I'd be honored to accompany you," Patrick offered. "Or if you'd rather avoid it entirely, that's understandable too." Sarah considered his offer. Part of her wanted to hide away, but a stronger part rebelled against the idea of cowering. "I think I would appreciate your company if you can spare the time." "For you, I'll make time." The simple statement, delivered without flourish or exaggeration, warmed her more than elaborate declarations ever could. After dinner, Porter tactfully retired to his study, leaving Sarah and Patrick to converse in the small parlor. As the evening progressed, their discussion turned more personal. "May I ask," Sarah ventured, "why you've never married? A successful rancher like yourself must have had opportunities." Patrick smiled slightly. "There were a couple of possibilities years back, but nothing that felt." He searched for the right word. "Inevitable, I suppose." "The way it should when it's right." He met her gaze steadily. "Until recently." The implication hung in the air between them, neither ready to address it directly but both aware of its presence. "And you?" he asked. "Was Blackwell inevitable?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I thought so at the time. Now I wonder if I mistook security for love." "A natural confusion," Patrick observed without judgment. "Especially given your father's financial setbacks after the move from Chicago. You know about that. This is a small town, Sarah. People talk. And I make it my business to listen." His expression softened. "It takes courage to rebuild after losing everything. Both you and your father have that courage." As the evening concluded and Patrick prepared to leave, he took her hand briefly. "About tomorrow, I'll meet you at the library at noon." "The train's due at 12:30. Sarah nodded, suddenly nervous about facing Richard again. "Thank you for everything." "No thanks needed," he replied simply. "Just looking after what matters." After he left, Sarah found herself standing on the porch long after his figure had disappeared into the night, her mind filled with conflicting emotions. Apprehension about tomorrow's confrontation, lingering hurt from Richard's betrayal, and something new and tentative, a warmth that blossomed whenever she thought of Patrick's steady gaze and honest words. Monday arrived with an unusual energy coursing through Silver Springs. By mid-morning, crowds had begun gathering near the train station, eager to witness the return of the man who had betrayed their trust. At precisely noon, Patrick appeared at the library door. Sarah had been unable to focus on her work all morning, repeatedly misplacing books and losing her place in the catalog. "Ready?" he asked gently. She smoothed her simple blue dress, not the one she'd worn at their coffee meeting, but the same shade Patrick had admired. "As I'll ever be." They walked toward the station, Patrick's solid presence beside her a buffer against the curious stares. The whispers followed them, but seemed less malicious than before, perhaps because of Patrick's protective stance, or perhaps because Richard's capture had redirected the town's anger. "Remember," Patrick said quietly as they joined the crowd. "You have nothing to be ashamed of. Hold your head high." The train arrived in a cloud of steam and coal smoke. Sheriff Mills emerged first, followed by two deputies flanking Richard Blackwell, his hands shackled before him. Sarah's first thought was how diminished he appeared. The elegant suit was rumpled, his usually immaculate hair disheveled. When his eyes found her in the crowd, he flinched visibly. As the sheriff led him down the platform, the crowd's murmuring grew louder, punctuated by calls for justice and more creative suggestions for punishment. Richard kept his eyes fixed on the ground now, ignoring the jeers. "Anything you want to say to him?" Patrick asked softly. Sarah considered this. "No," she finally replied. "There's nothing to say that matters anymore." As the procession passed them, however, Richard suddenly stopped, looking directly at her. "Sarah," he called, his voice strained. "I didn't mean keep moving, Blackwell," Sheriff Mills ordered, giving him a not-so-gentle push forward. But Richard persisted. "The ring, I have your ring. They let me keep it. It's yours." Before Sarah could respond, Patrick stepped slightly forward. "She doesn't need your ring, Blackwell. Or anything else from you." Richard's eyes narrowed as he took in Patrick's protective stance. "Quincy, should have known you'd swoop in the moment I was gone." His gaze shifted between them. "My God, Sarah, did you even wait a week?" The crowd fell silent, eager for drama. Sarah felt a moment of white-hot anger. "You forfeited any right to question my actions when you left me at the altar and stole from everyone in this town." "I was coming back," Richard insisted desperately. "It was just a temporary financial, save it for the judge," Sheriff Mills interrupted, shoving him forward again. As they continued toward the jailhouse, the crowd followed, leaving Sarah and Patrick relatively alone on the platform. "Are you all right?" Patrick asked, concern evident in his eyes. Sarah took a deep breath, surprised to find that she was. "Yes, actually, that was. Easier than I expected." "How so?" Seeing him like that, diminished, desperate. "It made me realize I've been giving him too much power over my feelings." She looked up at Patrick. "I think I'm ready to truly move forward now." A smile spread across his face. "Good, because I have something to show you if you're willing to spend the afternoon away from town." Intrigued, Sarah agreed. Patrick had brought his wagon, and soon they were traveling along the dusty road leading west from Silver Springs, toward the rolling foothills where the rocking queue spread across the landscape. "I should warn you," Patrick said as they rode, "the ranch house isn't fancy. My father built it 20 years ago, and I've focused more on the cattle operation than improvements to the house." "I'm not looking for fancy," Sarah assured him. "Just honest." After about an hour's journey, they crested a hill, revealing a vista that took Sarah's breath away. A wide valley stretched before them, golden with autumn grasses. A creek wound through the center, bordered by cottonwoods just beginning to turn yellow. Nestled against the base of a gentle slope sat a substantial log house with a wide porch, smoke curling from its stone chimney. Various outbuildings and corrals completed the scene, with cattle dotting the distant pastures. "It's beautiful," Sarah said sincerely. Patrick smiled, clearly pleased by her reaction. "Wait until you see it in spring when the wildflowers carpet the meadows." The casual way he implied she would be around to see spring sent a pleasant flutter through her chest. As they approached the ranch house, several men on horseback nodded respectfully to Patrick, curious glances directed at Sarah. "My foreman, Miguel, and some of the hands," Patrick explained. "Good men, all of them." The house was indeed simple but welcoming, with solid furniture built for comfort rather than show. A large fireplace dominated the main room, bookshelves lining one wall surprisingly well stocked for a bachelor rancher. "My mother loved reading," Patrick explained, following her gaze to the books. "She taught school back in Missouri before marrying my father. Said just because we lived on the frontier didn't mean we had to think like frontiersmen." "A wise woman," Sarah observed, running her fingers along the leather-bound volumes. "She would have liked you," Patrick said quietly. Then, with a slight shake of his head, "Come, let me show you what I brought you here to see." He led her back outside and around to the side of the house, where a small fenced garden contained the remains of a summer vegetable patch. Beyond it stood a smaller structure, a cottage of sorts, with freshly whitewashed walls and a newly shingled roof. "My mother's studio," Patrick explained. "She painted landscapes mostly. After she died, I couldn't bear to change anything." He produced a key and opened the door. "I thought, well, it reminded me of you somehow." Inside, the afternoon sunlight streamed through large windows, illuminating a space that managed to feel both practical and enchanted. An easel stood in one corner, paintbrushes still arranged neatly in jars. Bookshelves lined with novels and poetry collections occupied another wall. A comfortable chair sat positioned to catch the best light, a small writing desk nearby. "Patrick, it's lovely," Sarah breathed, turning slowly to take it all in. "It's been closed up too long," he said, watching her reaction carefully. "Need someone who would appreciate it." The implication was clear, though unspoken. Sarah met his gaze. "Are you suggesting—" "Nothing improper," he hastened to add. "Just a possibility someday when you're ready." He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking boyishly uncertain. "I'm making a mess of this, aren't I?" Sarah found his awkwardness endearing. "Not at all. I understand what you're saying." Relief washed over his features. "Good. Because while I know it's too soon for certain conversations, I want you to know that I'm a patient man, and some things are worth waiting for." They spent the remainder of the afternoon exploring the ranch. Patrick showed her the apple orchard, now heavy with ripe fruit, and the meadow where he planned to build a larger barn next spring. They picked apples, laughing as they reached for the highest branches, and Patrick taught her how to approach the gentlest of his horses without startling it. As the sun began its descent, they sat on the porch, enjoying apple slices and coffee. The view of the valley spread before them like a painting. "I can see why you love it here," Sarah said, breathing in the clean mountain air. "It feels like freedom," Patrick finished when she hesitated. "Yes, exactly." He smiled thoughtfully. "My father used to say that land holds possibilities that cities never can. In a city, everything's already been decided, where the streets go, where people live. But land like this," he gestured toward the valley, "it's full of choices waiting to be made." The simple philosophy resonated with Sarah, who had spent the past 2 years feeling as though her path had been predetermined by circumstance rather than choice. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said softly. "It's given me perspective. I'm glad." His hand found hers on the porch railing, covering it gently. "And I hope you'll come back. I'd like that." She met his eyes steadily. "Very much." The journey back to town was quiet but comfortable, both lost in their own thoughts about the day and what might lie ahead. When they reached the Finley home, Porter was waiting on the porch, newspaper in hand. "Ah, there you are," he called as they approached. "I was beginning to wonder." Patrick helped Sarah down from the wagon. "My fault entirely, sir. I showed Sarah the ranch today and lost track of time." Porter's eyebrows rose slightly. "The ranch, and what did you think, daughter?" "It's beautiful," Sarah replied honestly. "Peaceful in a way I didn't expect. MMHMM. Porter gave Patrick an appraising look. "Best come inside, both of you. There's news you should hear." In the parlor, Porter handed Patrick the newspaper. Bottom of the front page. Patrick read quickly, his expression growing grim. "When did this happen?" "Word came by telegraph this afternoon," Porter explained. "Apparently he bribed one of the deputies." "What is it?" Sarah asked, taking the paper from Patrick. The small headline read, "Blackwell escapes custody, whereabouts unknown." "The sheriff believes he may have headed north toward Wyoming territory," Porter continued. "Though without funds he won't get far." Patrick's jaw tightened. "Don't be too sure. Men like Blackwell always find someone to charm or cheat." Sarah felt a chill of apprehension. "Do you think he might come back here?" "It would be foolish," Porter said. "The entire town is looking for him. When has Blackwell ever shown good judgment?" Patrick countered. "Mr. Finley, if you don't mind, I'd like to stay in town tonight, just as a precaution." Porter nodded slowly. "I appreciate the thought, but, Father, I think Patrick's right," Sarah interjected. "Richard was desperate yesterday, and desperate men do foolish things." After some discussion, arrangements were made for Patrick to stay in the small guest room off the kitchen. Before retiring for the night, he checked all the doors and windows and placed his rifle within easy reach of his bed. "You don't really think he'll come here, do you?" Sarah asked quietly as they stood in the kitchen. "Probably not," Patrick admitted, "but I wouldn't forgive myself if something happened and I wasn't here." The simple declaration, free from drama or exaggeration, touched her deeply. "Thank you for caring enough to worry." He smiled softly. "Get some rest, Sarah. Things often look clearer in the morning." But morning brought no clarity, only fog and a steady drizzle that matched Sarah's unsettled mood. After a tense breakfast, Patrick reluctantly prepared to return to the ranch. "I've got men expecting me," he explained apologetically. "But I'll be back by nightfall if you'd like." "We'll be fine," Porter assured him. "The sheriff has men watching the roads and the entire town's on alert." Still, as Patrick mounted his horse, he looked troubled. "Sarah, promise me you'll stay close to town today. Don't go anywhere alone." "I promise," she said, touched by his concern. The day passed slowly at the library. Few patrons ventured out in the miserable weather, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and the occasional rumble of thunder. By mid-afternoon, the rain had intensified, drumming steadily on the library roof. Mrs. Wilson, the mercantile owner's wife, was Sarah's only visitor, stopping by with the pretense of returning a book, but clearly eager to discuss the latest developments. "They're saying Blackwell had help," she whispered conspiratorially. "Someone from Denver who owed him a favor." And she leaned closer across the desk. "I couldn't help but notice Patrick Quincy's been paying you particular attention. Quite the rapid development." Sarah managed a tight smile. "Mr. Quincy has been a good friend during a difficult time." "Friend, is it, Mrs.?" Wilson raised knowing eyebrows. "Well, you could do worse. He's got good land and a solid reputation. Not as wealthy as Blackwell, of course, but then again, we now know where that wealth came from, don't we?" After Mrs. Wilson finally departed, Sarah locked the library early, the storm having worsened to the point where no one else was likely to venture out. The streets of Silver Springs had turned to mud, forcing her to navigate carefully as she made her way home, rainwater streaming from the brim of her hat. The Finley house was dark when she arrived, which struck her as odd. Porter usually lit lamps well before dusk, especially on gloomy days. Perhaps he had fallen asleep over his ledgers, as he sometimes did. "Father," she called, stepping into the front hall and removing her wet coat. No answer came. Unease prickled along her spine. "Father, are you home?" She moved cautiously toward his study, where a single lamp burned low. The ledger lay open on his desk, his spectacles placed neatly beside it, but Porter was nowhere to be seen. A creak from the kitchen drew her attention. Sarah moved toward the sound, her heartbeat quickening. "Father, is that you?" "Not quite," came a familiar voice from the shadows. Richard Blackwell stepped into the dim light, his elegant features haggard, his clothes mud-splattered and torn. but most alarming was the revolver in his hand, pointed steadily at her. "Hello, Sarah. You're looking well. Better than I expected, considering." Sarah forced herself to remain calm, though fear coursed through her. "Where's my father?" Resting comfortably in the cellar. "I needed private time with my fiancée." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Or have you forgotten that part already? You lost the right to call me that when you abandoned me at the church," Sarah replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "What do you want, Richard? What does any hunted man want?" "A way out." He gestured with the gun toward the parlor. "Let's sit. We have plans to make." In the parlor, Richard kept the revolver trained on her as he outlined his situation. He needed money and transportation enough to get him to California, where he claimed to have business connections who wouldn't ask questions. "You must have some savings," he pressed. "Your father certainly does, though he was remarkably stubborn about revealing where." "We have very little," Sarah told him truthfully. "After you stole from the bank, borrowed," Richard corrected sharply. "It was all going to be replaced once my investments matured." "Is that what you tell yourself?" Sarah studied him, seeing for the first time the desperate delusion behind his confident facade. "It doesn't matter what you call it. People lost everything because of you. And now I've lost everything," he snapped. "My reputation, my business, my future," he broke off, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "You were part of that future, Sarah. We could have had everything." "Built on lies," she said quietly. "It would never have worked, Richard." His expression hardened. "Well, it doesn't matter now. What matters is getting out of this territory, and you're going to help me." His gaze fixed on something beyond her. "You and your new cowboy friend." Sarah's heart sank as she heard the front door open, followed by Patrick's voice calling her name. "In here," Richard called, his gun now pressed against Sarah's temple. "Join us, Quincy, slowly and with your hands visible." Patrick appeared in the doorway, freezing at the tableau before him. His eyes met Sarah's briefly before focusing on Richard. "Blackwell," he said evenly. "This is between you and me. Let Sarah go." Richard laughed without humor. "How noble, but I think not. Sarah is my insurance that you'll do exactly as I ask." "Which is what?" "Your ranch is 15 miles outside town. Remote, plenty of horses." Richard's plan became clear as he continued. "You're going to take us there, provide me with fresh mounts, supplies, and whatever cash you have. Then I'll be on my way." "And Sarah and her father," Richard shrugged. "Once I'm safely away, I'll no longer need leverage." Patrick's expression remained impassive, but Sarah could see the calculation in his eyes. "Mr. Finley's welfare is part of this deal. Of course. He's in the cellar unharmed merely, confined." "I need to see him," Patrick insisted, "before we go anywhere." After a tense moment, Richard nodded. "Fine, but any tricks and Sarah pays the price." In the cellar they found Porter bound to a chair, a bruise darkening his left temple but otherwise unharmed. His eyes widened with alarm when he saw Sarah. "I'm all right, Father," she assured him quickly. "This is madness, Blackwell," Porter said, straining against his bonds. "You'll never get away with this." Richard smiled thinly. "I already have. By the time anyone realizes you're missing, I'll be halfway to California." Despite Porter's protests, Richard forced them to leave him tied, though Patrick managed to loosen the ropes slightly when Richard's attention was briefly diverted. "I'll come back for you," Patrick promised in a whisper. "Keep faith." Outside, the storm had intensified, lightning splitting the darkening sky. Richard forced Sarah and Patrick into the waiting wagon, keeping the gun trained on Sarah as Patrick took the reins. "The storm works to our advantage," Richard observed as they headed out of town, rain lashing against them. "No one will be watching the roads in this weather." The journey to the rocking queue was tense and miserable. The usually dry creek beds had swollen with rainwater, forcing detours. Twice they nearly lost a wheel in the mud. All the while, Richard kept the revolver steady, his eyes darting nervously at every sound from the darkness surrounding them. "You won't get far in this weather," Patrick said during a particularly fierce downpour. "The northern passes will be flooded." "Then I'll go south," Richard snapped. "Mexican authorities have been alerted," Patrick countered. "Face it, Blackwell, there's nowhere to run." "There's always somewhere," Richard insisted, though doubt flickered briefly across his face. "And I've managed worse situations." Sarah, watching him closely, realized something crucial. For all his planning, Richard was operating on desperation, not strategy. Each setback rattled him further, if they could keep him off balance. When they finally reached the ranch, the house stood dark, the hands presumably sheltering in the bunkhouse some distance away. "Inside," Richard ordered, gesturing with the gun. "And no signals to your men, Quincy. I'm watching." The main room was cold, the fire having died hours earlier. Patrick moved to light a lamp, his movements deliberately slow and methodical. "Faster," Richard snapped, his nerves clearly fraying. "Rushing in the dark gets people hurt," Patrick replied calmly, finally illuminating the room with a soft glow. Sarah caught his eye briefly, reading the silent message. "Keep calm, follow my lead." "Now," Richard said, "money first." "Where do you keep it?" "Strongbox in my bedroom," Patrick answered. "But there isn't much. Most of the ranch's profits went into new stock this year." "Show me," Richard demanded, gesturing for them both to precede him down the hallway. In Patrick's sparse bedroom, he unlocked a small metal box, revealing a modest stack of bills and some coins. "Told you. About $80. The rest is in the bank in Silver Springs." Richard cursed, pocketing the money. "It'll have to do until I can reach my contacts, now supplies and horses." "The storm," Patrick began. "I don't care about the storm, we're leaving tonight." As they moved back through the house, Sarah's mind raced. Richard was becoming more erratic by the minute. Once he had what he wanted, there was no guarantee he wouldn't silence them both. In the kitchen, Patrick began gathering supplies: jerky, hardtack, coffee, moving with deliberate slowness. "The trail to the South Fork will be washed out," he said conversationally. "You'll need to take the ridge route." "Fine, whatever," Richard muttered, distracted as he counted the money again. "Just hurry." Patrick caught Sarah's eye, then glanced meaningfully toward a drawer near her. Understanding flickered between them. "Richard," Sarah said, deliberately drawing his attention. "Even with supplies, you'll never outrun a proper posse." As Richard turned toward her, Patrick lunged for his rifle mounted above the door. Richard swung around, firing wildly. The bullet splintered wood near Patrick's head as he dove for cover. Sarah yanked open the drawer, finding a small revolver. She'd never fired a gun before, but had seen her father handle one. She raised it with trembling hands. "Drop it, Sarah," Richard commanded, his gun now trained on Patrick, who was sprawled on the floor. "Or I'll put a bullet in your cowboy right now." Sarah hesitated, her heart pounding. "You'll kill us both anyway once you have what you need." "I don't want to hurt you," Richard insisted, a pleading note entering his voice. "I never did. It was all just circumstances got out of hand." "Like now," Sarah kept the revolver steady. "Put down the gun, Richard. It's over." For a moment, something like reason seemed to enter his expression. Then his face hardened again. "No, I'm not going to prison. I can't." The world exploded in sound and confusion. Later, Sarah would struggle to piece together the exact sequence. Patrick surging upward, Richard swinging the gun toward him, her own finger tightening on the trigger. 2 shots rang out almost simultaneously. Richard staggered backward, a look of utter surprise on his face as a crimson stain blossomed on his shoulder. Her shot, imperfect but effective. Patrick's bullet had gone wide, splintering the window behind Richard. The revolver fell from Richard's hand as he clutched his wounded shoulder, collapsing against the wall. "It's over, Blackwell," Patrick said, retrieving both guns while keeping a cautious distance. "Sarah, are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak, the enormity of what had just happened washing over her. She had shot the man she had once agreed to marry. Richard looked up at her, pain and disbelief in his eyes. "You shot me." "You gave me no choice," she replied, her voice steadier than she expected. Patrick quickly bound Richard's wound, a clean shot through the fleshy part of his shoulder, painful but not life-threatening. Then he secured him with rope from the barn. "We need to get your father," Patrick told Sarah gently, "and fetch the sheriff." "Can you stay here while I ride for help?" Sarah nodded, the revolver now feeling heavy and foreign in her hand. "I'll be all right." "Keep this," Patrick said, returning Richard's gun to her after unloading all but one bullet. "Just in case, but he won't be going anywhere." After Patrick departed, silence fell over the kitchen, broken only by Richard's labored breathing and the persistent drumming of rain on the roof. "I would have given you everything," Richard finally said, his voice hollow. "A grand house in Denver, servants, jewels, everything a woman could want." Sarah looked at him, this man she had once thought she loved, and felt nothing but pity. "That was never what I wanted. The cowboy, then." Richard asked bitterly. "A life of hard work and isolation, mending fences and scraping by." Sarah thought of the small studio Patrick had shown her, filled with books and light, of his patient explanations about cattle breeding and apple varieties, of the way he looked at her not as an ornament or a possession, but as a person of value. "A life of meaning," she corrected quietly, "with someone who sees me, not just what I represent." Richard had no response to that, and they lapsed into silence until, nearly 2 hours later, the sound of approaching horses announced Patrick's return with the sheriff and several deputies. The following days passed in a blur of statements, legal proceedings, and town gossip. Richard was treated by the doctor, then transferred to Denver to face trial for his crimes. Porter recovered quickly from his ordeal, though the bruise on his temple lingered for weeks. Sarah found herself alternating between moments of shock over what had transpired and surprising clarity about what she wanted for her future. Through it all, Patrick remained a steady presence, never pushing, simply being there when needed and respectfully distant when she required solitude. 2 weeks after the confrontation at the ranch, Sarah visited the small studio again. Patrick had given her the key, telling her she was welcome anytime, with or without him present. The autumn sunlight streamed through the windows as she explored the bookshelves more thoroughly, smiling at the eclectic collection that revealed so much about the Quincy family's interests. She was sitting in the comfortable chair, a volume of Wordsworth open on her lap when a knock came at the door. "May I join you?" Patrick asked, hat in hand. "Of course," Sarah replied, gesturing to the small chair near the writing desk. "It's your studio, after all." "Not anymore," he said quietly, settling into the chair. "I meant what I said before. This space needs someone who will appreciate it properly." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Patrick spoke again. "I've been thinking about what happened with Blackwell." Sarah nodded, closing the book. "As have I. Are you all right?" Truly, she considered the question carefully. "I am. More than I expected to be. I keep waiting to feel overwhelming guilt or regret, but instead, he prompted when she hesitated. "Instead, I feel like I've finally taken control of my own story." She met his gaze steadily. "For too long, I've let circumstances dictate my path, first in Chicago after the fire, then here with Richard. But in that moment in your kitchen, I made a choice. A difficult, terrible choice, but mine." Patrick's expression softened with understanding. That kind of clarity doesn't come easily. No, she agreed. But now that I have it, I don't intend to lose it again. She took a deep breath. Which is why I've been thinking about your offer, about this studio and other possibilities. A careful hope entered his eyes. And what have you concluded? That some things are indeed worth waiting for, she said, echoing his words from weeks before. But perhaps we've waited long enough already. Patrick moved from his chair to kneel beside hers, taking her hand gently in his. Sarah Finley. I've known since the moment you explained the difference between Hawthorne and Melville to me with such passion that you were someone extraordinary. I don't have Richard Blackwell's money or polish, but I can promise you this. I will never lie to you, never take you for granted, and never value anything in this world above your happiness. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she placed her free hand against his cheek. That's worth more than all the bank vaults in Denver. Then, he continued, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a small object, would you consider wearing this? Not because you need it, but because I'd be honored if you would. In his palm lay the simple gold band he'd offered her that day in the church, his mother's ring. Are you asking what I think you're asking? Sarah whispered, her heart beating rapidly. I'm asking if you'll marry me, Patrick confirmed, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. Not right away if you're not ready. I meant it when I said I'm a patient man. Sarah looked at the ring, then at the man, offering it, a man who had shown her nothing but respect, honesty, and quiet strength. The choice felt simple, inevitable. Yes, she said, smiling through her tears. And I don't think we need to wait too long. I know my own mind now, more clearly than ever. As Patrick slipped the ring onto her finger, the simple band caught the sunlight streaming through the windows, glowing with promise. Winter gave way to spring, and with the thaw came new beginnings. The town of Silver Springs gradually recovered from Richard Blackwell's betrayal. The bank reopened under new management, with Porter Finley serving as chief accountant, a position that utilized his skills far better than simple bookkeeping had. On a perfect May morning, with the meadows around the rocking queue ablaze with wildflowers, Sarah stood once again in a white dress simpler than her previous wedding gown, but far more suited to her. The small church had been transported piece by piece from town, and reassembled on a gentle rise overlooking the valley, a wedding gift from Patrick and the ranch hands who had worked tirelessly to make it happen. Inside, friends and neighbors filled the pews not for spectacle this time, but for genuine celebration. Mrs. Wilson had outdone herself organizing the decorations, while Maggie Jenkins and the other town wives had prepared a feast to be served afterward. As Sarah waited at the back of the church with her father, she caught sight of the simple wildflower bouquet in her hands and the gold band already gleaming on her finger. Patrick had insisted she wear it during their engagement, saying he wanted everyone to know she was spoken for. Ready? Porter asked, patting her hand where it rested on his arm. More than ready, Sarah replied with absolute certainty. The small orchestra, 3 local musicians, and the schoolteacher on piano began playing, and the church doors opened to reveal Patrick waiting at the altar, his expression transforming with wonder as he saw her. Their eyes locked as she walked slowly toward him, every step feeling like coming home. When she reached him, Porter placed her hand in Patrick's with evident satisfaction. Reverend Thomas smiled at them both. Dearly beloved. The ceremony proceeded beautifully until the moment came for the exchange of rings. Sarah removed her engagement band, preparing to return it temporarily so Patrick could place it back on her finger as part of their vows. But to her surprise, he shook his head slightly. I have something else, he whispered. From his pocket, Patrick withdrew a new ring, still simple, but inlaid with tiny sapphires that matched her eyes. "My mother's ring brought us together," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed church, "but this one is for our future. I had it made from gold panned from our creek, with stones that reminded me of the way you looked at me the first time I brought you to the ranch." A murmur of appreciation rippled through the congregation as he continued. "You waited at the church with no ring once before," Patrick said, his voice thick with emotion. "I said then you could have mine. Today I give you this one, made especially for you with the same promise. Everything I have, everything I am, is yours for as long as we both shall live." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, it caught the sunlight streaming through the church windows, sending blue reflections dancing across their joined hands, a perfect symbol of the beauty they had found together after the storm. Later, as they stood greeting their guests outside the church, Sarah caught sight of the small studio in the distance, its windows now adorned with new curtains she had sewn herself. Beside it, the foundation had been laid for an addition to the main house, a library, Patrick had explained, where they could build their own collection of books to share with future generations. "Happy?" Patrick asked, noticing the direction of her gaze. Sarah turned to her husband, her heart still fluttering at the word, and smiled. "Perfectly." As the celebration continued into the evening, with dancing in the barn and laughter echoing across the valley, Sarah found herself standing for a moment on the porch of what was now truly her home. Patrick joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. "What are you thinking?" he asked quietly. She leaned into his embrace, watching the sunset paint the landscape in hues of gold and promise. "I'm thinking about that day in the church when Richard didn't come. How I thought it was the end of something when really it was just the beginning," Patrick finished, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Exactly." She turned in his arms to face him. "Sometimes the best turns in our story come from the moments we think have broken us." Wise words, Mrs. Quincy. The name, her new name, still brought a rush of joy. "I had a good teacher in patience and perspective." Patrick smiled, drawing her closer. "We have a lifetime for learning together." As they returned to their guests and the celebration that would continue well into the night, Sarah felt the weight of her new ring on her finger, not a burden, but an anchor, connecting her to this man, this place, this life she had chosen with clear eyes and an open heart. The story that had begun with her waiting alone at a church altar had transformed into something far more beautiful than she could have imagined, not because fate had decreed it, but because she and Patrick had built it together, choice by deliberate choice. And as the stars appeared one by one above the rocking queue, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that this was merely the first chapter of their story, one that would continue to unfold across seasons and years, written in shared smiles, quiet conversations, and the enduring gold of a promise kept.